Jain friends, I am Major Gaurav Arya and you're watching the Chanakya Dialogues English. A lot has been happening in the Russia-Ukraine war, and one thing that stands out, one thing that is clear to all students who have studied campaigns, who have studied military history, is that somewhere Russia seems to be getting bogged down. It's too early to say what has happened, but the kind of military superpower that Russia is, it is my sensing that the story of the Russia-Ukraine war should have been over a long time back, but it's not. The war is still in progress and nobody has any idea when it's going to finish. We are not talking about the sanctions. We are not talking about the geostrategic importance and the fallouts therein of this conflict. What we are going to do is have a conversation on basic military tactics and strategy with one of the finest minds, known very famously as the scholar warrior, Lieutenant General Syed Hasnain. Sir, Jai Hind, and a very warm welcome to our show, sir.
Jai Hind, and thank you very much, Gaurav.
First of all, sir, I'm not going to introduce you, sir. I've come across a lot of flack. Don't keep on introducing. We know who General Hasnain is, so I'll sort of cut back on that, sir.
Thank you for that.
Sir, my first question to you is, Russia may not be an economic superpower, sir. That train has left the station. But it still maintains an awesome and a staggering variety of weapons and a standing military that is perhaps, one of the most dangerous, one of the most fearsome fighting machines. They have their intercontinental ballistic missiles, and they seem to have an endless supply of artillery and an endless supply of armored vehicles and what have you, sir. It's more than 2 months, or 2 months into the battle for that matter, sir, into this entire war. And I wouldn't say that Russia has credibly captured even 20% of Ukrainian territory. I mean, a port city here, a town here, that's okay, sir. But don't you think this is stretched on for too long?
Absolutely right, Gaurav. It has stretched on for too long. And I admit I was one of those who felt that this war would end in 5 days. First, I thought this war would never start. And then when it started, I said it'll end in 5 days. Because we were going by conventional thinking, Our brains are attuned to that kind of a thing, the kind of superiority by reputation which the Russian armed forces enjoy. Obviously, it hasn't come to pass. Now, one of the things, let's look at it historically. The Russian armed forces, which are a rump element of the former Soviet armed forces, were geared primarily for a strategic kind of an offensive, the type which was looked at during the Cold War, a large-scale mechanized offensive into the plains of Europe. And it was supposed to be essentially a mechanized maneuver warfare. Of course, backed by nuclear deterrence, which was there very much. And then, of course, a tremendous amount of missilery and rocketry and things like that. It was never expected, even in those days, that it will come down to hard grind infantry warfare in built-up areas. Most areas in that case, in the case of the Operation Maneuver Group Doctrine of the Soviet Army, it would have meant bypassing a large number of built-up areas and leaving them behind and creating shunts and creating your lines of communication behind you. That's not what is applicable in this case. This is a classically, first of all, it is not a conventional conflict. It is a conflict, a modern-day conflict, which is a mix of hybrid and conventional. Of course, conventional is very much there, but hybrid element is also there. But the most important thing which is coming down here is that it is the boots on ground. It is the ability to put down the infantry into the hard grind. I think no better example for the public to understand this than the example of Iraq, where you found the Battle of Mosul, where a large city in northern Iraq, the ISIS had taken over, and the Iraqi army, backed by the Russians, backed by the US also, took the better part of a little under 3 months to capture this city. We're a built-up area, and the more you destroy the built-up area, the greater advantage it gives to the defender because of all the rubble which is there. And if you have not effectively sealed off that city, if you have not maneuvered around it and isolated every access to that city, the system will continue to maintain itself. No, this is a classic example of what happened in Kiev, for example, here. In Kharkiv also, you can badger your head against a built-up area from a single direction, from multiple directions. But if you haven't isolated, if you have not driven in all those early warning elements, if you have not made an access into the, to get a foothold into the city, and from there expand into the city with the help of infantry and tank teams, you will be found wanting. This is exactly what is happening here. I'm sorry to bring it down to such tactical levels, but conceptually, this is what ultimately is required. The Russians thought perhaps that the use of superior firepower will lead to shock and awe, wilting of the Ukrainians, the inability to fight, the leadership probably caving in. None of that has happened. All that the reverse has happened. A greater resolve to fight, use unconventional, basic, down-to-earth infantry tactics, prevent the ingress into the built-up areas. All this has led to the Ukrainian success, and which is what has forced the Russians actually to now switch around. And remember, switching around is never easy on a front as big as this. Again, Ukraine is the third largest country in Europe. Switching a front around, remembering the fact that the Ukrainians are on the internal lines of communication. The Russians are on the exterior lines, which means swinging around means a couple of 100 kilometers of movement of forces. And the Russians haven't even looked at their logistics professionally. If you have to switch axes in war, if you have to switch complete directions and address a completely different region, you need massive logistics for that. The Russians seem to have come with the idea that this battle was for 3 to 5 days, and the logistics they had catered for was that much too. Remember, in the Indian Army, when we go for battle, if we are looking at a 14-day war, we must have a 30-day capability to sustain ourselves, because the war will not go for 14 days as we have planned it. So I think a couple of faults have taken place, and I would say it's slightly at the lack of a larger understanding of modern warfare today by the Russian leadership, and high levels of frustration, which is never good in such battles.
So you mentioned about lines of communication and lines of supply, sir, which brings me to rolling stock. Now, we've seen that when we move fuel and large volumes of even armored vehicles, it's mostly done on rolling stock. Now, most of these rolling stocks, so they have their centers near the cities or inside the cities, sir. Has this also hampered Russian logistic movements, sir? Access to rolling stock?
You see, it's a developed area. Ukraine is also a part of a developed zone as such. So the railway lines, the lines of communication etc., are of a reasonably modern status. And therefore, I'm sure even starting from the time of the Cold War, the Russians are the first to realize the importance of technology, the importance of bringing vehicles, the tracked vehicles to the battle zone. And these tracked vehicles must all be in a status of being able to go straight deep for the enemy's territory. It's not that you bring them on tracks. This is something the public needs to understand too. That a tank, for example, has so many grinding parts within itself to move, that if you move it on the road on its own tracks, it's not going to last very long. So to preserve the equipment, everything is moved either on carriers or on rolling stock, as Gaurav Arya says, on rolling stock. Rolling stock, what is rolling stock? Rolling stock is all these different types of platforms you have in the railways to be able to carry these vehicles. You can even carry an Ashok Leyland vehicle, for example, from one part of India to the other part of India, so that it doesn't move on its own traction. Now, this is something when you are mentally not prepared, when you're mentally thinking that you are going to finish this war in 5 to 7 days, obviously you will not cater for this kind of reinforcement, redeployment and movement and things like this. This is all part of operation logistics. This is contingency planning. Now, if you think that you can move a whole force from, let's say, 700-800 kilometers on one flank to 800 kilometers on the other flank, and you think you can move this on tracks, you got to be thinking again. You got to be thinking of military professionalism all over again. Let me just for anecdotally, let me tell you, I participated in an exercise in the desert way back 25 years ago. And one of our very senior and respected commanders, he said, let us try this. We tried a flank move of 80 to 90 kilometers on tracks. And at the end of the day, we all concluded this is impractical. You can't do this. So, one of the major things in the launch of mechanized operations is once you get fixated to a direction, it is very difficult to switch hundreds of kilometers without having the backing of operational logistics. And therefore, your summation that the Russians did not have that kind of backing, it's not just rolling stock, Gaurav. It is also fuel. It is also greases. After all, tanks require special greases all the time. It's ammunition. The amount of ammunition which tanks require, right? So all this put together you need an operational logistics angle to it, and very, very professional angle to it. Unfortunately, and this is a lesson for our army also, we sometimes downplay our own operational logistics. We don't look at the professionals in our armed forces, the professionals who look after the domain of operational logistics. These are people, many times staff officers from the ASC, the EME, and things like that. And of course, many general cadre officers who also participate in all this. But this domain definitely is, the lesson coming out of Ukraine is that this domain has not received sufficient attention of military professionals around the world.
So your views on February, sir. We have been taught in the army fighting in built-up areas. And if we go back to military history, where, the Battle of Stalingrad, sir, where the Nazi army or the German army, you had their panzer divisions going deep inside Russia, and Russians allowed them to come. And they said, we have General Winter. That was the anecdote, which goes around saying that we have General Winter. But they fought it in the rubble of the cities, sir. And there were ambushes, and there was a lot of sniping. And this happened to the Russians. Didn't the Russians think for a while? Didn't they study their own military history? And also, sir, what are your views about fighting in built-up areas, specifically, which is specific to Ukraine?
You see, Gaurav, is all about what is called attritional warfare and maneuver warfare, right? Now, if you remember, first of all, a misnomer among a lot of military minds that maneuver warfare applies only to the mechanized battlefield, which is not correct. You have maneuver warfare very much in the mountains. It's a comparative thing. Maneuver is a question of getting yourself to be placed at a position of advantage in a battlefield. Look at Kargil. We were forced to go into attritional battles. Number one, because it was a failing that we had allowed a Kargil to happen, number one. And number two, there was a lot of political pressure, public pressure, and the Indian Army's reputation was at stake. And we went in for attritional battles. We achieved our aims, but at the cost of fair amount of casualties. Maneuver is all about, for example, in the case of Kargil, and I go back to Kargil in the mountains, but that should relate also here. You can have multi-directional attacks. You should have rear approaches and things of that kind. You could even do a heliborne assault in a certain area and place roadblocks behind you. It seems that in this case, in the case of Ukraine, the Russian mindset has been hugely attritional. They've made one bold attempt right in the beginning, and I was impressed. On the first day of the war, they attempted to get to the Kyiv airport. They got there. Surprisingly, they didn't cater for a ground thrust, ground push to cater for a link-up. Which special forces in the world can sustain itself more than 72 hours or 96 hours? Everyone always looks for a link-up subsequently.
Absolutely, absolutely.
A logistics route is opened up and you resupply, you get more men, get reinforcements, get ammunition, and then you fight all over. Here, the airport at Kiev has changed hands 3 times. I mean, the Ukrainians could come and surround these people, invest the area which they had occupied, and evict them from there. And the Russians kept coming back and somewhat didn't cater for this aspect at all, which is what got me thinking. Is there seems to be some flaw in the military thinking in the Russian ranks. They seem to think that steamrolling is the only way forward. Is this a flow over from the Cold War period, from the Operation Maneuver Group Doctrine? I don't think so. The OMG Doctrine was supposed to be maneuver, not attrition. Although in those days, the Russians always thought firepower is the most important element in war. But reminding our viewers, go back to 1969. I always say that they fought the PLA in a place called the Damansky Island on the Ussuri River. The amount of ammunition that the Soviet army fired, it changed the course of the Ussuri River. That much. And how many PLA died, no one even knows. How many PLA soldiers died? No one even knows. So maybe they're harking back to that kind of a thing, because the manner that they have treated Kharkiv, the manner that they have treated Mariupol, it seemed they thought that a huge amount of rocketry and missilery, gunfire into these areas will force the population, the leadership, everyone to wilt, and there'll be no resistance. It is in these kind of situations that resistance gets stronger. And here you've had a ground level leadership, which is of amazing kind in Ukraine, where they have been able to get their act together. We've got people who are not necessarily soldiers who have come together. One thing which is perhaps not known to a lot of people is that the Ukrainians have been preparing for this kind of a situation for the last 8 years. 2014, when it happened, when the very famous occupation of Crimea, etc., took place, the Ukrainians probably realized that their time would come and they would have to fight. The amount of American advisory which is available to the Ukrainians. There are people from all over the West who are there, who are advising on information warfare, advising on small-scale tactics. There are contractors with the famous Black Watch who are there, who have got former American servicemen who are there and training these people. So obviously a lot of thinking has gone into this, and it is proving to be successful. But I must caution both you and myself, also, Gaurav, that much of our information is coming from the American and the Western sources. Post this war, we will hear much more on the Russian angle to it, the Russian perception of what happened. Perhaps that's the time when a lot of interesting discussions will ensue.
So, I have two questions, sir, before I wrap up this episode. One is on leadership, sir, because we've always been taught in the Indian Army that officers lead from the front, and officer casualties, at least in the Indian Army, are always disproportionate, sir. That has been the legacy, that has been the DNA of the Indian Army. Here we see something else with the Russians, or at least those are the reports, sir. They may be Western reports, but the fact of the matter is, why does it seem to us? If it's not true, why does it seem to us? And if it's true, why is it that morale is plunging, sir? I'm talking about the Russian forces.
As you started this particular intervention, Gaurav, you stated the right thing, that we are still not sure of what we are assuming at the moment. So, of course, we will discuss it, but the truth may come out subsequently also. There is no doubt that when you go into battle with a certain gung-ho attitude, and you are presuming victory is going to be at your feet in a matter of hours, if not days, then automatically, and when you meet the first major resistance, and you find that you are not making headway, and you continue to bang your head and you continue to be attritionist in your approach, morale, motivation is the first casualty of this. Of course, the first casualty is the plan. As we all know, that in war, the first casualty is the plan. So the Russians came with a plan. The plan was 4 to 5, 6 days, use of initial firepower, not even the use of too much of air power, etc. When they got a surprise in the beginning by the kind of resistance which came their way, they tried changing the tactics. They tried to bring in more infantry, etc. But Russia is hamstrung, no doubt, by the fact that they haven't been used to using their infantry in conventional battle in the manner, for example, that the Indian Army is used to it. In the Indian Army, we pay a lot of attention to infantry tank cooperation. I'm sure you must have attended many exercises of infantry tank cooperation in the desert, etc. You go for a couple of days, you go with the armor boys, and you learn about the tank, they learn about the infantry takes a ride on the tanks, you go 30, 40 kilometers, piggyback on the tank, as you call it. You learn about the restrictions of what the tank cannot do, and therefore, where does the infantry need to step in to help the tank? These are the things that you learn. I don't think the Russian army is into this kind of a thing. The infantry in Russia appears to be at a bit of a limb at the moment, and I have explained this many times in many programs, that the demographics of Russia do not sort of support very infantry-oriented battles today. You know, a population which is under regression at the moment, coming down from 145 million to 135 million, or even less than that. Body bags of an older population, body bags are not something which is welcome. It's not welcome in any society anyway, but here it has a greater effect. And therefore, the Russian leadership is extremely careful about utilizing the infantry in these attritionist battles. And that's one of the reasons why the boots on ground are not making progress and you're not being able to get inside. When you don't get that kind of a success, and it has a telling effect on leadership at all levels. One thing I will definitely say is I learned that about 11, if not about 11 to 14 general officers, or officers of the rank of generals in the Russian army, have been killed in battle. Now, that's quite amazing. It's quite amazing, because that should signify that they are right well up in front. But what I learned is that the electronic warfare which the Ukrainian army is following is with support of Western sources, the Americans in particular, where they are being able to pinpoint exact locations of the headquarters from where any electronic activity emanates, and they can even point out the exact command post in which a general officer is sitting and directing his battle. And therefore, thereafter, all the world's ammunition is then fired onto that spot. And that's how most of these generals have been killed. So it has had an effect on the killing of generals, the killing of middle and senior level leadership always has a telling effect on the army. So it's because of this that, the Russians have been in a bit of a regression. They are coming back into it. If you see, they're coming back into it. Mariupol, they've gone into Mariupol, they've taken Mariupol, although President Putin is saying they will not go for the steel works, etc. Obviously, they will not go for the steel works, because that is going to involve a yard to yard, meter to meter kind of a battle inside the underground complex of that steel plant. And for that, you cannot use tanks. You will require a lot of infantry to use.
Yes, sir.
Right?
Yes, sir.
But
yes, sir.
Notwithstanding that, I think the Russians are now coming back, because there has been a tremendous push from the top political leadership. There have been purges probably which have taken place as far as the Russian armed forces are concerned. And everyone is now concerned about his own job and about his own appointment and about his own ego itself, reputation. So 2 months down, it is yes, the Russians are maybe able to turn around and perhaps perform a little better. Now, this is the time the Ukrainians have to be very careful, because their own stamina is now getting sapped. They don't have the kind of course, the West is providing them with the finances, they're providing them with the logistics. And one of the major advantages the Ukrainians have got is that the Western flank, the flank from Kiev westwards, if you look into the borders of Poland, Hungary, Moldova, etc., is completely open. So everything can flow in from NATO. The Russians will not be in a position to stop it. There is no no-fly zone even, and despite not having a no-fly zone, the Russians are flying nothing in that area to dominate that area at all.
Sir, my last question to you, sir, is, so we have discussed this before also on this very platform, and but that was 4 or 5 weeks back. Today, again, I would like to ask you the same question that I asked you more than a month and a half back, sir. What are the lessons for the Indian Army here, sir?
Okay, some of this we have alluded to already here.
Yes, sir.
Today.
Yeah, yes, sir.
Let me start with some of the elements which we don't often talk of. And I have mentioned it here in today's program itself. It starts from Operation Logistics. In a week's time, I am going to be speaking at a very major institutional discussion on Operation Logistics. And I'm glad that in the Indian Armed Forces, we are waking up to it. I personally felt the effort that the Indian Armed Forces, the Navy, the Army and the Air Force put in the month of August 2020 to get 50,000 troops deployed in Eastern Ladakh was a marvel, absolutely a great achievement in operation logistics. The ability to sustain these last 2 winters, mirror the Chinese deployment, has been an amazing thing itself. But we cannot rest on our laurels. Ukraine is proving to us that if you have to sustain yourself, if conflicts, don't presume that conflicts at the beginning of wars, we could presume a conflict is there for 14 days. This is a long-standing Indian assumption that the international community will come in and put an end to the conflict in 14 days. Well, that's with Pakistan. Okay, that's what the people talk about. But today, India's stature is much higher. We are not going to be listening to international interventions in this manner. This kind of pressurization on us will not work to that extent. We will perhaps be fighting to a certain different kind of plan these days. And for that, you need to have the capacity to be able to fight long. And therefore, your stamina, the stamina of industry, the stamina of resources, and most importantly, the stamina of motivation and your morale must be very high, from the public down up to the military. This is what is really coming out of Ukraine here. For long, we have presumed that in modern day wars will be of 6 to 14 days, 15 days duration. That's not going to be so. This war will prove itself, perhaps in Ukraine, that it will extend far beyond. So operational logistics is one of the very important things. Leadership. Now you're seeing what is happening in Ukraine. And this is not really a lesson for the Indian army, because it's not an army which has ever been found wanting as far as leadership is concerned. I remember, if you read General Harbaksh Singh's book, War Dispatches, you will realize what a critical situation that existed in Punjab in 1965 and how it was turned around by his personal intervention. Now, of course, he has written a lot about himself in that, but I can vouch for it because I have done other readings to see and note how General Harbaksh Singh's personality and his leadership as a Western Army commander, landing up in the middle of the Battle of Asal Uttar there and directing the battle, how it turned the things around. So no level is too low. Senior leaders can be anywhere, and they can make a change, they can make a difference to the state of things at any point in battle. This is something that we should be fully wary of. Many of our leaders have done it. In Kargil, it happened. Sure. We had some great leaders in Kargil, even General Malik's presence in Kargil from time to time. I just met him recently and had the great pleasure of talking to him and, reviving the memories of what all he did during that time. He was in the 15 Corps headquarters almost every day. He was flying to Kargil almost every second day to take stock of things. Frontline leadership needs the higher leadership to come, be with them, hold their hands when required. And it's in conditions of failure that you require your higher leadership to back you. I think this is what has been happening with the Ukrainians. They've been backed to the hilt, it seems, by their president, who everyone seems to be making fun of. That's okay, but his ability to resolve things on ground and provide that kind of leadership is making a difference to Ukraine. So why not? So we have seen operational logistics, we've seen leadership and leadership at all levels. There is no shortcut to lesson learning in the course of battles, the course of wars itself. And an army which says, I will go back to my own, the way I have been trained, the way I have always handled things. If you continue doing it that manner, then you are reinforcing your own failure. And there's a very famous saying, don't reinforce failure and attack. Try and find different approaches. So therefore, innovate. Innovation is, I think all that the Ukrainians are doing is they're innovating, right? They're taking advantage of the reluctance of the Russians to close in with the built-up areas, right? For example, those ambushes, you're seeing the air ambushes by Stinger missiles. Small little teams standing out, swarming into those areas around the built-up areas. Swarming is a thing which is going to make a huge difference in the future. We saw a demonstration on swarming of drones during the Army Day parade this year itself. So taking a cue from swarming of drones, it is also the swarming of anti-tank teams, the swarming of two-man anti-aircraft teams. It is these kind of things which will make a huge difference around built-up areas in particular. And that actually comes out of in very, very effective individual training. This is not collective training. Collectively, you may be very good in your maneuver, etc. but your individual skills are very important. We pay a lot of attention on individual training in the Indian Army. We need to remain focused on it. But this aspect of ambushes by small teams is something that we can probably dwell on much more in the near future. This is very much at the tactical and the sub-tactical level. Besides that, of course, there is no shortcut to technology. You've seen technology is one of the most important things. Anything of a high technological quality will always prevail in battle. And the last thing which I would say, of course, we can carry on the lessons learned, is the aspect of information warfare. We've been talking about it for very long.
Yes, sir.
Information warfare has now come of age, and you will have to build in the information element into your larger strategic, operational, and tactical plans. Without this, it won't happen. You're seeing last 2 months how information is playing a role in this entire game. This is something that we need to do, perhaps to a much higher level in India. Understand the whole dynamics of information warfare from a more professional front, and not just the armed forces. This is something which is required to be learned by every functionary in the government of India, within the media, and the armed forces. Yeah.
Sure. Thank you very much for your time, sir. Ladies and gentlemen, with Lieutenant General Syed Hasnain, he brought out very beautifully about fighting in built-up areas, why the Ukrainian forces have been able to hold off the Russians in spite of the fact that the Russian army is, at least militarily, far superior on paper. And he also said what will happen in the future. There was also a lot of crystal gazing here, in which the general said that, the concepts of the armed forces, what you learn, if you're not willing to be flexible, you will suffer. Thank you for joining us, and thank you, sir, for your time. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll meet you soon with another episode and another special guest. Till then, Jai Hind, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and press the bell icon. Jai Hind.